Hello, and welcome to this very special episode of Politics Relaxed podcast. And as we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now, this week we have our first interview with a very special guest. So, Felix, would you like to introduce him?
Okay, and now the man with the power to make Jacob Rees-Mogg look even more stupid. He has a radio show with 1.5 million listeners weekly who make stupid Brexiteers look exactly as they are stupid Brexiteers. James O'Brien.
Hello, boys. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, but on a serious note, James O'Brien is an incredible journalist that hosts a podcast and a call-in show on LBC. So, James, first of all, about your radio show, has there ever been a time when you have completely changed someone's opinion live on the radio?
I don't know if it happens live on the radio with the actual callers, because I think people are quite reluctant to climb down in real time. But I do hear from a lot of people who might be listening to a call on the radio rather than actually being the person who made it. And I think my favourites over the years are probably when people who've become quite caught up in far-right political movements listen to me talking about, for example, immigration or Islam. And so there's three people I've heard from directly who were members of the English Defence League when they stumbled across the programme, and they got in touch to thank me for steering them back towards the light. So that can be quite special. And then one of my all-time favourites was a chap who had sadly ended up having quite a homophobic worldview, and he listened to the programme quite a lot. And his nephew then came out as gay, and his nephew's dad, his brother, my listener's brother, was very unhappy about it and very cross. And this chap got in touch with me to tell me that he'd used some of my questions and thoughts to actually help his brother cope with having a gay son. And as a result of that, the whole family had managed to get to a slightly more harmonious place. So those experiences mean a lot to me.
Yeah. I mean,
very special experiences.
Yes.
Yeah, to help sort out a family problem from afar by just doing your job. Yeah.
Well,
quite impressive.
It's funny that you say from afar, because it's a weird thing. Radio. It has. I mean, it is from afar. Obviously, you could be listening to me in Kuala Lumpur, but you're also listening to me in your bedroom or in your car. So the reason I like it more than television or newspapers, but both of which I've worked in as well, is because of that intimacy, because it is simultaneously from afar, but also right in front of you, right on the nose,
Yeah.
I mean, we touched on Nigel Farage in the introduction, but you were colleagues with him once. Did you get on professionally, or did you tolerate each other?
With this question, lads, straight for the scoop. I avoided him like the plague. If I thought he might be in the room, I'd stay outside. I'd only walk past him once, and this was before hand sanitizer was freely available throughout the building. So I had to make do with soap and water. But it's fair to say that I don't miss him. I don't miss him in the building.
Yeah, not his biggest fan.
You could say that. You could say that.
Yeah, it might be an understatement. Yeah. So, just continuing on the theme of Farage, we got a question from one of our listeners, which was about. Have you seen his recent tweet and video about the immigrants in the hotels? Yeah. So I've just got a quote from one of his tweets, which was, yesterday I tried to book a room at the 4-star Bromsgrove Hotel and Spa, but it was closed to the public. Turns out it's accommodating 147 illegal migrants, and we're all paying for it.
Well, I mean, where do you start? First of all, he's lying. He didn't want to book a room. He knew full well that the hotel was being used to accommodate asylum seekers. They don't become illegal immigrants until their asylum application has been processed, and if it were to be rejected, then technically that would apply. So if they turned around to him and said, "Yes, sir, you can have the bridal suite on the 4th floor," he wouldn't have known what to do, because the whole shtick was confected. The second point to make, and he's tooling around the Kent coast at the moment, filming some of the most desperate people on the planet, trying to steer rubber dinghies over the English Channel, is that what he should be doing now is celebrating Brexit. and jumping up and down about how brilliantly it's going. But of course, it's not going very brilliantly. So he's desperate to stay relevant and desperate to distract attention away from the last thing that he sold to the British public, which was this ludicrous decision to leave the European Union. Unfortunately, throughout the ages, he just happens to be a little better at it than many people are. Throughout the ages, you can distract a population from reality by making them fearful of an invented threat, and that's very much what he's doing here. I live near Bromsgrove. I grew up near Bromsgrove. I've got nothing against Bromsgrove, but the idea that someone would want to go there on holiday is patently ridiculous. But that's what he does. He conjures up these false dilemmas and these false problems, and then tries to use them to make people who aren't very well informed even angrier than they are already, and then usually he gets them to send him money, either by joining one of his political parties or by, I presume, making advertising revenue off the YouTube channels and what have you. You'd hope that he would have outstayed his own welcome by now, because he isn't relevant in any meaningful sense. But I think he'll be the last person on the planet to realise that. The ultimate irony, of course, is that his own ancestors, being Huguenots, French Huguenots, would have come over the English Channel and received a rather warmer welcome in Dover than he's prepared to give to his Syrian equivalents. I have a friend called Hassan Akkad, who is a Syrian refugee. His asylum application was accepted. He was tortured by President Assad back when he lived in Damascus. And Hassan, at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, went to work in a NHS hospital as a hospital cleaner. He didn't have to, but he felt that debt of loyalty and that desire to help out. So I'll leave you and your listeners to decide who is a more valuable adornment to British society, a Syrian refugee who went to clean hospitals at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, or the other fella.
Yeah, he does always seem to pop up where the media's focused.
Like a bad smell.
Yeah, he's always there. You never want him, but he always is.
No, well, I mean, his opportunities, his platforms are being reduced, but unfortunately, in purely commercial terms, selling tickets for the ghost train, well, you know what it's like. You'll always see a much bigger queue for the ghost train than you will for the speak your weight machine. People are often a lot more interested in being frightened and enraged than they are in receiving sometimes quite boring or even uncomfortable facts.
Yeah. So, Felix, do you want to ask a question?
Cool. Obviously, we had Owen Jones's attacker jailed only a few weeks ago, and Joe Cox was stabbed in the lead up to the Brexit referendum. Your job's quite a dangerous place. Have you ever felt endangered?
No, I haven't. Well, I mean, theoretically, I can, because of the events that you remind me of, and I think the proudest achievement of my career will be to be hated by racists and Nazis, however much longer I carry on doing this. But Owen is a friend of mine, and that was a terrifying experience for him. There was also a degree of homophobia involved in that, because Owen is gay. But I mean, I think if you start thinking like that, then you start censoring yourself, and if you start censoring yourself, then the fascists have won. So I don't feel scared in the sense that you mean, but I'm not stupid. I'm conscious of. I think I was more scared. I got into quite a big row with Frank Lampard, who's now the manager of Chelsea, as you know, many years ago. Not about anything political, but I upset him because his relationship was breaking down, and his partner had said some things in the newspaper which I repeated, and he rang in and we had a bit of a row on the radio. But the only time I've really felt scared doing this job is when I was sitting on the tube minding my own business on the way back to West London, and I looked up, and it was obviously a match night. I think it was a Tuesday night, and Chelsea were playing at home, and every single person in the tube was wearing a Chelsea shirt. And this was about 2 months after I'd really upset Lampard, and I just lifted my evening standard up to cover my face and just started really praying that nobody it was me. So that's probably the most scared I've ever been.
Yeah, they do have a slight reputation, the Chelsea fans.
You're not getting me to say anything controversial.
Not again. So would you say that that theoretical danger was the worst aspect of your job, or would you say that there are worse aspects?
I think the worst aspect of my job is knowing that it is easier to persuade people into positions of anger and even hatred than it is to persuade them out of it. So, you know, it's a lot easier to fool somebody than it is to persuade them that they've been fooled. So in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly, as you've seen, and I saw both results coming, actually, probably because of what I do for a living. A lot of other people who would describe themselves as liberal or even, God forbid, metropolitan elite were deeply shocked by the Brexit result. And then, of course, even more so by the election of Donald Trump in America. But because of what I do and because of who I talk to every day, and because I'm a bit of a student of newspapers, and we still underestimate, even though they're waning in popularity, they still exercise enormous influence over the broadcast news agenda and the wider public. So I kind of knew what was coming, but I do get frustrated by the difficulties that you have in making people realize what's under their noses, making people realize the effort that's been put into making them blame the wrong people for their own plight, or blame, you know, most obviously you've got very, very powerful rich people trying to get normal Brits to blame very unpowerful poor people for their problems, and it's heartbreaking, actually, but
Yeah.
it's also quite frustrating.
Yeah, it's like it's all about populism, isn't it? It's these high trying to appeal to these working class people to get what they want.
It's not just working class, Dylan. It's also I mean, look, it goes all the way up to the highest echelons of society, and it works on everybody. The only difference is that we're a very class driven society, and I'm still learning this, and you know, I'm much older than you guys, and I still underestimate it, but I'm pretty confident. You mentioned Farage earlier. I'm pretty confident that if you took someone like Stephen Yaxley Lennon, or Tommy Robinson, as he likes to call himself, and you took his words and you poshed them up and you put him in a chalk stripe suit or a linen suit, the ideas that they come out with and the tactics that they use, and what you rightly call populism, when it's coming from a posh person, it reaches the British public in a very different way from how it does when it's coming from a working class person or someone, for example, with a strong regional accent. And I didn't really appreciate this, but if you could imagine Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, talking like the lost Mitchell brother out of EastEnders, his reception from the British public would be completely different from what it is now. And we have to be careful not to fall into this trap, because what you find is posh populists, or even fake posh populists, who have adopted the accents and the mannerisms of the aristocracy or the ruling classes. They talk about white working class values, but they use it actually as a synonym for racism. So if you go back to the Cable Street protest, when Oswald Mosley, who was the last very successful fascist in this country, he was chased out of the East End of London by working class people. And this modern attempt, you see it even more in America, your average working class white person is not racist, but by claiming that being opposed to immigration is a working class impulse, or by claiming that white working class people are being overlooked, or by claiming that it's a class issue, the problem actually grows. So I find the scariest racists are the ones that went to public school, actually.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I put something about how, like, capitalism was going to be the death of us on my Instagram, and every single person was coming in about, like, oh, but working people can't get, like, their money, it's going to get stolen by their leader.
Yes.
And it's just all the same thing about, like, how we have to work hard and get our money, and it's all so crazy. But we'll move on now a bit to more, like, of the radio side of your job. And how do you keep your shows running smoothly? I mean, there's quite a lot of risk involved with live callers on air. How does it, like, work?
Quite a lot of risk. So, I mean, every show is different, and I don't want to suggest for a minute that the way I do things is the right way to do things, or the only way to do things. Other radio presenters, other phone-in hosts have different approaches. But if you ring my show, you speak to one of the producers first. There's usually two people answering the phones, and they know what I like. I don't like rubbish calls. So if you ring in and struggle to remember your own name, even though it might make funny radio for me to tease you, that's not really what I want to do. And similarly, if you ring in and you don't sound very certain, then I don't really want you to come on air, because that runs the risk of me looking like a bully, or me looking as if I'm railroading my callers. So what we want is callers to have quite a clear idea of what they want to say, and confidence in saying it. In many ways, the best calls are the more confident they are, the more powerful it can be when it turns out that they've built their confidence and their certainty on very, very flimsy foundations. But the final defense, if you like, is we call it the dump button. And what you hear on the radio is roughly 10 seconds ahead of what's happening, or 10 seconds.
Really? Yeah.
10 seconds behind what's happening in the studio. So if you came on and started swearing at me like a trooper, then there's a button that we can all press, which would just jump 10 seconds, if you see. So the people listening to the radio wouldn't hear the last 10 seconds of audio. And that we use that maybe, 3 or 4 times a year. And it's usually more to protect ourselves from libel. And someone accidentally and not deliberately says something that could be legally questionable about someone in the public eye, or they might slag off one of my colleagues on the station. And I don't really like, unless it's Farage, I don't really like that to go out over the radio. And so the dump button is quite important, although there are some radio stations that don't have one. So
Really?
I don't want to embarrass you, but when my friend Nikki Campbell on Radio 5 Live mispronounced North Kent Hunt, and I think Jeremy Hunt's name on occasion has been mispronounced as well by BBC, and they don't have
as well.
they don't have a dump button to press. So I find it's a reassuring presence.
Yeah, we might need to get one.
Yeah. And then you're a host. Dylan's a host. Have you got any advice for him on his hosting?
Yeah, listening is more important than talking. But Dylan knows this already. He's very good at this. It's odd. You think the trick is to keep talking, but actually listening is really important. The very first time I sat in a radio studio, I was a newspaper reporter, as a show business editor, and I wasn't enjoying it. I thought I was going to love it, but it was a bit unsatisfying intellectually, I suppose. And so I was thinking, I wonder if I could break out into something else, or I wondered if I could do something else. And I was sitting, it was Radio 5 Live, and it was a night shift. It was a midnight slot, and they used to get in newspaper journalists to review the papers. And the presenter, I noticed, had questions written down in front of her that the producer had written, and a guest came on. And the presenter asked the first question that was written on the list. I don't remember the details because it's about 20 years ago. But the answer to the first question was really interesting. And instead of exploring it, the presenter read the second question on the list. And I remember sitting there and thinking, that is mad. That is such a missed opportunity. They sort of opened up a really interesting avenue of conversation. And because all you're doing is reading out your question and basing your and then your second question is going to be what was written down before the interview had even started. You miss out. That was the two things happened that night. The first was I thought, do you know what? I think I could do this job better than the professional, which is a bit cocky, but you need to have a bit of ego to do this for a living. And the second bit was realizing how important it is to do that. So when I started, I presented Newsnight for a while, a few years ago, and even at that level of the BBC, one of the big flagship TV shows in the country, even there, the producers were sometimes nervous when I said, well, we don't need to write down any more questions because they're bound to say something interesting. We've booked the Director General of the World Trade Organization, or we've got a cabinet minister on. And they felt much more happy to have a list of questions written down in advance, because everybody's terrified of silence, you see, or everybody's terrified of the train coming off the track. So in the end, I'd keep them happy by writing down half a dozen questions, and then when we actually went on air, sometimes I didn't even ask any of them, because even in the course of introducing a guest, you might suddenly think, oh, I know what I'm going to ask them, and I would. So listening, and always treating it like a conversation rather than a Q&A, you know, so that the listener is on the journey with you. That's probably the best advice I could give.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do. More. I've been.
Have you got any advice for me, Dylan? Have you got any advice for me?
I've been called that has been.
Felix, stop laughing, please. This is a serious.
But yeah, I don't write questions down. I just have like 3 main points which I want to talk about each week, and then I just let it go on from there. Like
That's
for example, last week or the week before, we did the UK's relations with China.
Wow.
And we were talking about Hong Kong, and then it moved on to the British Empire, and how it was similar in the way that we made our money like that, and now we're stopping China from doing it in the same way, which I thought was quite interesting. But
definitely. And you wouldn't have known beforehand that was the direction the interview was going to go in. So or the conversation was going to go in. So the other thing is, of course, to be fair, because I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing everybody who does things differently. If we only had 4 minutes together, we probably wouldn't be able to go off on a bit of a roaming around type experience. You probably wouldn't have wanted to start focusing on broader questions of the British Empire, because you wanted to get the latest news from Hong Kong. But if you have a bit more time, this is why I like doing podcasts more than radio interviews. If you have a bit more time, then you can explore unexpected areas.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a good, what am I trying to say? It's upside to not being live.
Yes, exactly that. Because of course, then if you can always do an edit afterwards. So I do a podcast with guests, and sometimes you might just lose 5 minutes of it because it didn't really follow on from what went before or lead in, just to make it a bit tighter, you know, in the edit. But I like the sense of not knowing what's going to happen next. That's the best thing about radio, is that you never know, especially with a phone-in program, you never know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So on the topic of your podcast and with guests, who would you say has been your favorite or most interesting person that you've interviewed?
Oh, that's a tough one. It depends what day it is, you know, because some days I might say, I think interviewing Eric Cantona was a bit of a treat for someone of my age. He's a sort of Manchester United legend, but also a really fascinating interviewee. But, you know, recently Matty Healy out of the 1975 was very special. Tony Blair, Ricky Gervais, Russell Brand. I mean, there's very few people I'd really like to interview that I haven't interviewed. And so far on the podcast, nobody has disappointed, because I'm very lucky that I can basically base the bookings on who would I like to spend an hour with. And we went down to Steve Coogan's house in Sussex, and we interviewed him in his sitting room. I mean, we've had so many, it would be almost impossible to pick an all-time favorite, I think.
Yeah, lots of big name drops there.
You can't accuse me of name dropping if you're asking who my favorite guests are on my own podcast, and they all happen to be
No, I like it. I like that.
No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Name checks, not name drops. There's a difference.
I'll write that one down.
Yeah, we'll change the subject a bit. Obviously, you talk a lot on your podcast. No, on your your radio show. Sorry, about Brexit, and it's almost got you your big break.
Yes, it changed everything for me. I didn't expect it to, but it just seemed to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. So how do you think we'd heal these huge divisions we have in the country at the minute because of Brexit?
I don't know, Felix. I mean, the short answer would be everybody who's responsible for this catastrophe has to own up to it and admit it, and then the rest of us can forgive them and try and rebuild something from the ashes. But I mean, they're not going to do that. I think the reason I got so heavily involved in trying to get a second referendum was only partly because of the knowledge of what Brexit would be in reality, but it was also because the people that won weren't going to stop there. You know, so people would say to you, you lost, get over it. And you'd say, well, I would get over it, but the people that won cheated and they lied. And if you let cheats and liars win, if you let them get away with their lies and their cheating, what will they be in charge of next? And it broke my heart, obviously, to see Johnson get into Downing Street on the back of the Vote Leave movement and bring Cummings with him. And then I said for 3 or 4 years, if you don't hold them to account, what will they be in charge of next? And lo and behold, they're in charge of our response to a global pandemic that has turned out to have the highest excess death rate in the whole of Europe. And it is, you know, objectively one of the worst results in the world. And there's your answer. What will they be in charge of next? They'll be in charge of fighting coronavirus. And just look at what's happened. So that's a problem for me, and it makes perhaps the divisions even greater. But I don't honestly see how these wounds get healed while the people that caused them are still claiming that it was a good thing. It's like, you know, smacking yourself over the head with a frying pan and then claiming that you loved it. And until they admit that they hate it, I don't know what the rest of us are supposed to do, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, since they are in charge, how do you think Labour will bring back voters? Because after that absolute shocker of a election, how do they bring it back?
Well, I mean, to be, as you, I'm sure, have already worked out for yourselves, the last election result was a catastrophe of leadership. The choice for many voters between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn was like choosing between a rock and a hard place, whether you were a traditional Labour supporter or a traditional Conservative supporter or somewhere in between the two. You would have felt, many people felt that they didn't really have anybody that they wanted to support. So I think in the first instance, the Labour Party needs to put clear blue water between its modern incarnation and the last leader, which it's doing. Keir Starmer today overtook Boris Johnson in the polling as a preferred prime minister, although because of the legacy of the last leader of the party, the Labour Party still lags behind the Conservatives. But in terms of who you'd rather see as prime minister, Keir Starmer has already moved ahead, and I think an awful lot rests on him and his front bench. They almost need to rebrand the Labour Party, but oddly, they need to rebrand it as being roughly where it was in about 2015. I'll tell you what is interesting, if for your politics studies, is if you look at the manifesto that Ed Miliband fought the 2015 election on, and then you look at all of the things that have been done by Theresa May and latterly Boris Johnson's government, it's quite incredible how many of Ed Miliband's policies they've just nicked. But what you have to remember is that when they were Ed Miliband's policies, the right-wing media, the right-wing newspapers were queuing up to condemn them. But when a conservative government, so you could be talking about the energy price cap, you know, there's a variety of things that they've done that Ed Miliband suggested originally, and it's a useful lesson in newspaper bias. And this is probably my pet subject, is just how much influence, even as I said earlier, even as they sell fewer copies, the desperation of newspaper owners not to have a Labour government because a Labour government would see some movement on their tax situation, on their tax affairs, and so that means that the same policy, a non-taxation policy announced by a Labour leader, will be attacked, and then the same policy will be praised by the same newspapers. That's a deeply weird thing.
Yeah. It is. It's not fair, is it really?
No, and I've been watching it for, you know, I worked for newspapers before I got into broadcasting, and it's a really uncomfortable thing for me, actually, because I have good friends and former colleagues who are still on. So, you know, the Telegraph, the Mail, and the Sun now are all pretty equally toxic. If anything, the Mail is less toxic than the other two, which certainly wasn't the case for most of my life and career. And they don't see it. They don't know it. I've written about this in my next book, because if you're in the team, you don't acknowledge the sins of your own team. It feels disloyal. And I think I think a lot of them. I mean, when I first left the Express, the Daily Express, I was a huge enemy of press regulation. I thought even after phone hacking, I felt that regulating the media would be like a baby step towards totalitarianism. But when you get out, when you get a bit of distance between yourself, you can see things a bit more clearly. And you see newspaper columnists attacking firefighters, attacking doctors, attacking the emergency services, and then you realise just how not corrupt, that wouldn't be fair, but corrupted that many elements of the industry have become, and it is really worrying because can't quite see the way out of that. And of course, social media and online media goes even further into the darkness because it has to attract an audience. So if you're looking at the Sun now or the Telegraph and you're thinking, well, we need to go even further to the right than that, that's how you end up in some very murky places.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the Sun, every single time they backed the eventual winner of the election, their influence is crazy. I mean,
well, it's Rupert Murdoch's influence. So what he'll do, the Times might swim in a slightly different direction. But what you need to do, you need to ask what result would Rupert Murdoch want? And you're absolutely right. Almost every ballot that this country has had in the last 20 or 30 years has gone exactly the way Rupert Murdoch would have wanted. And I'm not suggesting that he's a magician, but it's unlikely to be a complete coincidence. I think they might have been all right with Tony Blair in '97. Actually, I think they did support Tony Blair in '97 because Tony Blair's brand. So even then, they got the result that they wanted, even when it was a Labour Prime Minister who got over the line. And I asked, just to name drop again, Dylan, I asked Tony Blair about this.
Name check,
thank you. I asked Tony Blair about this a couple of years ago, and he acknowledged that was one area where he wondered if they'd bent too far.
Yeah, I mean, they had that famous meeting in the Cayman Islands.
Yes, exactly that. So to get Murdoch on side, did we abandon too much of the territory that we should have been championing? And it was interesting to see. So the longest pause during our interview came after that question, and it was interesting to see, again, with distance. You'd think if you were there, you'd think, well, look, winning is everything, and once we've won, then we can worry about all the fine print. But actually, his victory was so huge in '97. You kind of wonder whether. Anyway, it's water under the bridge now. But yes, that influence Murdoch wields is still immense. And the great famous line, which he said or it was reported, he'd said it to the business editor of the Evening Standard, that when he goes to Downing Street, whoever's in charge, people sit up and take notice. But when he goes to Brussels or when he tries to influence European politics, nobody cares. And I thought that was a really good argument for staying in the European Union, because some people saw it that way.
So as a last question here, it's a bit of an idealistic one, which is if you had the power to implement one law, one bit of policy, to help our country out, what would you do with it? A tough one.
It is a tough one, but only because there's so much to choose from. I think that the conflation of fact and opinion is really problematical. So I think that probably I would have proper sanction in place for media organisations that publish something that wasn't true. I'd make the apology and the correction be at least as big as the original mistake. At the moment, you can put something on your front page that turns out by tea time not to be true, and the apology appears 6 months later on page 506. That seems to me to be very problematic. Other than that, that's more media regulation. I think I'd probably teach in schools more on political realities. So the numbers, if you look at people, even for adults, but I guess you've got to start somewhere. When you ask them about how big they think certain problems are, they're most obviously with immigration or latterly with Islam, they report back numbers that bear no resemblance at all to the reality. So I think just in various different ways, I'd try and claw back from feelings and opinions territory that should really be dedicated to facts and evidence.
Yeah, but I don't think that would ever happen under a Conservative government because they thrive on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, Labour's not perfect. I think
No.
under the last leader, the Labour Party went through a series of delusions and denials that stood comparison with any right-wing movements of the last 20 years. And there are plenty of good Conservatives out there. Sadly, they're not in the Conservative Party anymore in the House of Commons, because all the ones with any backbone or, in my view, got chucked out in November of last year. Again, all over Brexit. But yeah, I think as I get older, I've become more open to disagreement, as long as it's honest disagreement. And what we've got at the moment is deeply dishonest disagreement, and we come back to this problem of Brexit being built on lies and cheating. And until that is acknowledged, even by the people that voted for it, I don't know how we start fixing all the other stuff.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for coming on here and letting us interview today.
Great questions.
Thank you. And to anyone listening, we hope you enjoyed this, and please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So thank you again, James. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Really good. I'll speak to you soon. Take it easy.